Okay, guys. Good afternoon.
Hello. Good afternoon.
You excited?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's pray and ask for God's help. Well, let's bow our heads. Father, we want to thank you for today. Thank you for all that we're going to be able to talk about here and all that you're going to do. May our hearts be inspired and the work ahead prepared, both in our brain, in our mind, in our heart, and by the power of your Spirit. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Okay, well, let me just give you a little bit of an idea of what we're going to do. We're going to be together for about an hour and a half. There'll be a break halfway.
Another hour and a half.
This isn't the return of the king, it's only Dissertation. What's going to happen is Dave's going to do a couple of sessions. There's going to be some Q&A. There's going to be some
ice cream
reflections from students that have been down this path. And so every possible question you might have about your dissertation you can ask. The guys are coming down from the library to help us, and Lizzie's going to pop in. It's all going to happen in the next hour and a half or so. I want to begin by, I suppose, inspiring you a bit, just for a minute, and then I'll get back onto the sheet. But I had the privilege over the last few weeks of beginning the job that I've now got, which is to supervise, not to supervise all the dissertations, that would be silly, but to supervise the supervision of the dissertations. And so I've looked at all of the dissertations that came in, from the 30s. Either I've looked at the actual, papers themselves, or I've looked at the rough plans and the proposal documents. And I want to say this with all sincerity: the work that comes out of Mattersey Hall is amazing. It's amazing. And there's a whole group of students about to leave in a few weeks' time who have just done the most amazing work. All sorts of themes and ideas, all sorts of topics, and a whole number of them ought to go and be published as far as I'm concerned. It's brilliant, brilliant work. And that only came about because each student, each writer really gave themselves to doing it. And even when a student didn't do all that well, let's say their grade wasn't quite what they wanted it to be, the ambition of it was superb. And so I suppose I want to begin by just putting this seed of ambition in you, that you would think about your dissertation as something that you can be very proud of, something that you can be really devoted to, committed to. You're going to spend 400 hours on it. And perhaps I shouldn't have said that so early on in the afternoon. But anyway, it's something that you're going to have to be notional 400 hours, allegedly. That's what we're going to tell everyone anyway. So it's going to be with you to define a topic that you're going to love, that you're going to do some research on, that you might even have something unique to say about, some new piece of knowledge. I know that's sort of PhD stuff, but something that's very, very exciting for you. So my role for you when we get back after the summer is I'm going to become the new, I don't know what they call it, everyone's a director, but perhaps I should just be called an overseer.
Master
Of
the universe.
Okay. Chief architect.
Of dissertation.
Yes. I'm going to be in charge. And which means that I'm going to supervise this module, because the dissertation is sort of a module actually. I'm going to supervise the module, which means that I'm going to help you to come up with a great title, to come up with a great theme, to give you to a supervisor who's going to be the best one for you and to lead you through. So this afternoon, what we wanted to do was just to get you ready, because when you come back after the summer, you're going to need to have a dissertation proposal within 2 or 3 weeks of coming back, something like that. And so what we don't need to do is to think about it then, but start to think about it over the summer, maybe get some books out over the summer, start to develop some ideas so that you really get ahead of the game. And so I want you to be excited about this afternoon. I want you to be excited about the dissertation. It is something that you will find hard, but hopefully you'll also love at the same time. And Dave Harvey is going to help us today. So why don't you put your hands together for...
Welcome to the third year classroom.
Yes.
I would like it at Mattersey how you can tell where you're up to in your studies by where the light is coming from. I mean, it's coming from this side, it's the first year, from behind you. I think it's kind of metaphorical for where you're up to. When you're casting a shadow over everything, you're in your second year. Right, well, excellent. It's good to be here, good to see you. And try and rescue your brain from the atrophy that has set in already since you stopped working last week. And start looking a little bit ahead. There's a weird thing happens with any sort of research project that you do, and I say this from painful experience, that it always seems big, and it always seems like something you need to worry about at some other point. And then all of a sudden, it's dead one day, and there's people trying to knock out 8,000 words overnight. And you can knock out 8,000 words overnight. It is humanly possible. It's the quality of those 8,000 words, and that's what you would obviously be marked upon. So there's a sense in which it might feel like, why am I thinking about my dissertation, which is due in about 50 weeks' time, when I've got a whole summer ahead of me yet? But really, the idea of doing this today is off the back of this year's third years, really sort of saying, actually, if we could have got started on this early, that would have helped us a little bit. So that's really why we're doing this now, is to help you get ahead of things on that. So what I wanted to do really with you today was a couple of things. Once this being the sort of thing I've been overseeing just for a couple of years since we moved to a mandatory dissertation. I started looking after this, but then with new roles I've taken on, Peter's now going to be looking after the whole dissertation process. And that's good for you guys, because Peter is genuinely, he loves Jesus, so that's an improvement from what you all think about me. Peter is friendly, Peter likes students, all great reasons that he's better to do this job than me. I'm just grumpy, and so after 2 years of doing dissertation supervision,
I'll be grumpy too.
Yeah. No, nobody's come to me yet with no idea of what they want to do on a dissertation. Everybody has a thought in their mind. In the 2 years I've been doing this, and we had dissertations in a very different format prior to that. And nobody ever comes along and says, "Oh, I think you've got absolutely no clue at all." It's a case of, can I turn the thoughts that are going on in my head into a sustainable project? Is it something I can write about? And there's a couple of things that I think are really worth identifying about that early on at this stage, before you head off into the summer. I'm not too bothered if at this stage you're like, I have no idea what I'm going to write about. That's okay at this stage. But you probably got a field that you know it won't be already. Right? And I'm going to suggest New Testament. All right? Don't do anything on the New Testament. That gets us off the hook for marking. And so, New Testament, most people that fail dissertations at Mattersey fail at the New Testament. Specifically Pauline studies and anything on Galatians. So that's the resource. Pentecostal studies, nothing on Pentecostal studies. So we would recommend Old Testament, particularly dissertations on the Nephilim. They would be well received by the Old Testament department. Okay, no, seriously. Don't worry too much if at this stage you don't yet know what you want to do. But you probably have an idea of the field. You're probably sat here going, I want to do something on the Gospels, not Isaiah. Or I want to do something on, Isaiah and definitely not Genesis. Or it's going to be something New Testament. Or it's going to be something church history. This is what I would say to you before I get into that. It's a year-long piece of work. Right? 400 notional hours. And that's not an average. I know some of you looked and you saw Chris. Chris did about 1,000 hours. But an average that works out about right, because a couple of the third years did about 2. And so on average, it's about 400 hours. Research that goes on into that. But no, 400 hours. Think about it this way. A 40-hour week, which is a standard working week, unless you're in ministry, in which case that's a standard working day. But 40 hours a week is your standard working week. So the dissertation is a 10-week-long project if you were doing nothing else. Right? So I think that's a helpful way to think about that. That if you started today, the idea would be that you wouldn't finish until 10 weeks' time. So that would be forming an idea, meeting with your supervisor, doing the research, and doing the writing. So when people are saying dissertation is due in a month, and I've not even started yet, they're in some serious trouble. Right? And occasionally people pretend that they've done less work than they do. That's kind of academically cool thing to do. Oh, I'm so behind. And secretly they've been thinking about it the whole time, and they just write it out at the last minute. But what's different to everything else that you've done so far at Mattersey, I don't know what your experience is elsewhere, is a vast chunk of the research of anything you've written so far at Mattersey has been done for you already. Now you didn't realise that, but that's what class time was. Right? That's what, when you get given a question to ask in an essay, right? The lecturer has given you a question, or she has given you a question that is answerable, that has a subject area to it. There's actually a question there. There is the key thing in all research. There's jeopardy to it. You can answer this question wrong, or you can answer this question right. All that's done already. So you just take the question and go, right, go into the library, go into this session, into the right section, get the right books, read the books, type the answer. That's the sort of rough, simplistic process you've been on so far. What makes the dissertation very different is you begin with a blank piece of paper. Nobody is forcing you what to write about, nobody is telling you what you need to think about, and you set your own question. And that's very important to say right at the very start. Therefore, when you write a question on the historical Jesus, and you have those late at night moments where you have a Dave Harvey doll and you're stabbing it, and just going, I hate that guy, I thought John Moxon was taking this course, that's why I took it, and then he left, Alex, and now I'm stuck with him again, and I hate him, and I hope he dies, right? Because who cares about this? It doesn't make any difference. 2 years ago I loved Jesus, and I came here to save the world, and now I'm reading about porn. And no one has ever liked Marcus Borg since Chris Gallimore did the second year. But this is the problem with your dissertation. When you have those moments, you chose the question, it's your subject, and you sat there. I do this as a PhD student, go, why am I talking about this? And then I realised, oh yeah, because I chose to. Because I was interested in this. Nobody forced me to ask this question, it's my question. So this is important that you get this right, because if you don't do well in your dissertation because you didn't answer the question, that's really bad because you set the question. And part of the reason why, and it is bad, and that does happen, that many students don't do as well as they might have because they don't answer their own question. Right? Now you can revise the question throughout the course of your year, but one of the things you're going to spend the summer doing, and this is where I really want to get onto some stuff now, and that's it. One of the things you need to spend the summer doing is actually deciding what's my question going to be. Right? So when you come back the other side of the summer, I wouldn't be too surprised if you're still bringing that back together, and then you've got a couple of weeks when you land, you'll probably hear what everyone else has been doing, and you start tweaking that in. But don't expect to come back the other side of the summer like with half your dissertation ready, right? And one of the things we're saying, I think we'll mention this a bit more later, is nobody's going to approve your dissertation subject before the summer, right? So it's not going to get looked at by a supervisor, talked about, or helped informally. You might have a chat over lunch with Glenn or Robin or me, or I say, I'm just thinking about this, any thoughts or advice? And if informally you can get somebody to chat to you about that, good on you. But nothing's going to be approved yet, because part of the thing we want to do, and part of the really important process of doing a dissertation, is that you actually show that you have the ability, as a now third year, to go out into your field, be that biblical studies and theology or Christian leadership, and find an area that can cope with a sustained study and an 8,000 word essay being produced out of it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Students have asked us in the past, why don't you just have like a folder, right, of of possible dissertation questions. And for a student struggling to get a question, they can just pull a question out of that folder and go and answer it. And that sounds like a really helpful thing, but then it ceases to be a dissertation. It's now just a long essay. Do you understand the difference? Because somebody else has if I tell you some things to talk about in Galatians, I can give every single one person in this room a Galatians essay to do quite easily. And they'll all be different. But part of the thing is because I've been studying that and exploring that, I know the areas to go and have a pick at, I know the areas to go and have a dig around in, where you'll find something interesting. Sorry, very emotional. And it's Galatians, you know. And but one of the things that you're trying to do over the summer, I would say, if you take our advice and start now on this, is actually find the area that there's something to say about. Find the question that's bugging you. I think that's a great piece of advice that was given to me once, and I've given it to a lot of people. One of the best things to do with the dissertation is just find something you want to know the answer to. You know, I mean, I don't know, you might be going to say this, I'm not sure, but given that I saw you, looking at tips on the internet, probably not the case, but I remember being in a class with Chris, where I think your dissertation started, and it was in one of my classes. Always good to come to my classes, Alex. And Alex didn't take one of my classes this year. Didn't do well for him. And and when you see Alex in heaven, right, in a Hyundai, okay, and I'm in a Benz, okay, you know what happens. There's so much wrong with that theology, isn't there? So we were in a class and we were having a conversation around the text in 1 Corinthians, and Chris asked a question. And it was a pretty obvious question in one sense, but actually a question that then on exploration, Chris discovered, because I didn't really answer, as is the truth, most questions are asked to me. So I said, Chris, hey, why don't you look it up? And I think it kind of developed from there. Actually, nobody was answering the question that Chris thought was there. Now that's quite an unusual situation. And I think eventually Chris found some strange person in Norway that was interested in the same thing. Is that about right? And someone else in the Philippines. Yeah. So Chris actually stumbled upon something that a few PhD students are working on, but by and large the academy have kind of potentially missed. And there's always the risk they've missed it because it's downright wrong. But it's also possible that they've missed it because actually they've just been too busy thinking about other things. That's not going to be true of everybody, that you're going to stumble over an idea that no one's talked about. But I tell you what is true, is in the last 2 years, one particular subject has probably riled you a little bit, or has probably bugged you a little bit, or you've probably thought, oh, if I had some time, I'd love to do a bit more study on that. And I'm just going to put it out to you, maybe your dissertation is the place to do that. Now it might be, I think probably, as Chris might be true of Chris, is you get to the end of that dissertation and realise there's still more to say here, there's still more to explore, and you might be the type of person that's where you go. Or you might be the type of person that thinks, I just need 8,000 words, spend some time thinking about this, and think about it like this. When you come to New Testament studies, the theory is that you're going to learn something while you're here. And therefore, the work that you do is more as evidence of what you learn, as well as helping you grow in your learning process. You shouldn't learn everything you know about a course from sitting in class, right? That's the big difference between uni and school, and hopefully we've figured that by now. That actually, when people say, I didn't learn everything in class I needed to know about this, well, you shouldn't, because it's a research process that you're on. But in your dissertation, don't simply think about it in terms of an 8,000 word piece of work that I have to write. Think about it as your learning process. Right? You get to spend 400 hours learning something, researching something, finding out about something, deciding what the answer is. If you're bored by the end of writing your dissertation proposal, it's not a good thing to do as a dissertation, right? Because the dissertation proposal is the short part of the writing process. Does that make sense? So something that interests you. And we saw some fascinating subjects this year of people writing about various things, some of the Christian leadership questions, about the, use of children's workers in schools, work with women in underprivileged situations, from historical studies of 1 Corinthians, social science readings of John's Gospel, theological questions about Pentecostal praxis, all things driven by, some people do some stuff on John, all things driven by questions that are in the person that wanted to ask them. So my main piece of advice to you is this. What do you want to learn about? And that's where to start your dissertation. What do you want to engage with? What is it that you would like to know the answer to, perhaps? Now, let me say this then, not to then, having set you up for that, you are not going to change the world with this dissertation. All right, so if you're not going to solve world hunger, you're unlikely going to, create nuclear fission, all these sorts of things. You've got 8,000 words to write this in, so there is also a level that you're going to get to the other side of your project if you've studied it well, as all the students I've spoke to have said, and they've all said to me, I wish I had more words. Actually, what started as, goodness, 8,000 words became, and what am I going to do after my introduction? Because the subjects are invariably quite big. But take the pressure off a little bit. It's not a PhD, it's not a master's dissertation, so it doesn't need to be an original piece of work. And by that, I don't mean it can be plagiarized, just because I'm bonus. I just go on the internet and get an 8,000 word essay. By original work, one of the things you need to do to pass a PhD is offer something to your field that hasn't been offered before, right? And you don't need to do that with your undergrad dissertation. Right? If somebody else can have held a similar idea to you, somebody else can have suggested the idea that you're suggesting, you're just looking to defend it from your position. It's your piece of work. And so you might be saying, Pentecostals generally believe X, and I'm going to build an argument to support this, despite the fact that many people have discredited this idea recently. Or I'm going to study this particular aspect of church praxis, which these churches are following, and I think they should think about something different. Or, I'm going to read John 3:16 and see what it means if I read it in Greek. Do you know what I mean? All these are valid questions that other people have done before, but you just want to do your piece of study on that. Do you hear what I'm saying there? So don't go back to your room or your house or your prayer closet and, and say to yourself, I must now find something brand new that no one's ever done before. Right? That's probably not what you're going to go and do on your quiz. So take the pressure off in that sense. Does that make sense? Cool. So, in that case, let me just say a few comments then about your dissertation. I've given you, just to try and be helpful really, and if it's not helpful then I apologise. On one handout it says dissertation module specification of models in the brain. I realised that was a social science joke. It sounded really wrong. Okay, let me just clarify that. In social science, which is all my PhD work's in, models are the sort of way you go about researching a project. You set up a model and see whether it works. And so that was a joke that Chris realised, that when you say something like, I've got models on the brain, that sounds like something entirely different, doesn't it? One of the things you should do when you're doing research, I wanted to bring a few of these with me, but I didn't in the end, it was too abstract. You should have a look at the PhD Comics website at some point in the next year. What's wrong? There might be there should be a few of them here, so I'm going to grab a couple. Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought you were. Here, take these. We'll be letting back in. Who knows? There's a great PhD comic on this where when you start your research, you're actually quite funny and you tell jokes and people laugh, and then after your research, you make these jokes. And it's a bit like being at Bible college. You make jokes that everybody thinks they're funny, other than anywhere else, other than being at Bible college. That can't happen. So anyway, has everybody got this page? Hand out.
That's my fault. Right, who hasn't got one of these ones?
No, it's not your fault. I handed them round.
That's your fault. Anybody else? Does anybody have a spare pen? No?
Would you like my glasses as well?
Anybody else?
Nobody has a spare pen? You have a spare pen? Would you like to share it with your sister? What I've given for you here is literally just a printout of what you can get from the website. If you go into the My Mattersey section, look up the module descriptor for dissertations. And this is just the one from the Biblical Studies and Theology printout. I've just put the code in there for the Christian leadership one as well. I would recommend you have a look at this. And I've printed it out just to make it even easier for you to do that. So some trees have died in order to help you with this. We just have a quick scan down. We've already mentioned the 400 hours bit. And the module content. This unit is designed to allow students to carry out an in-depth study of a topic of their choosing in the area of biblical studies and or theology, and if you're doing the CL1 or Christian leadership. The students will work independently with the support of a supervisor to choose a topic for research, identify and collect appropriate literature, offer a critical analysis and evaluation of source material, develop their own ideas in light of the research, and organise and structure material into an extended, critical piece of writing that sustains a coherent argument. Now actually, you don't need to know a lot more about a dissertation than that, right? And because it actually gives you all the points that you need to be involved in. And so, firstly, you work independently. Right? Now that will set you up right at the start as to what you're doing in your dissertation. You're doing your own piece of work. And supervised, supported by a supervisor. Now there's a very big difference between being supported by a supervisor and having a supervisor who does all your work for you. And sometimes I think students have the temptation to think that the supervisor's there as a kind of watchful eye just to pick me up. I'll just keep writing and you just tell me where I'm going wrong. Well that's not really research. So I've said to the supervisors in the past, Peter and I just talked about this, your supervisor's job is not to check your grammar, your supervisor's job is not to check whether you've done everything correctly. Your supervisor's job is to actually help you and guide you to ensure that your research project's kind of on track. And let me say this, and every year that I've overseen it, make a bad job of this, right? Most people go to their supervisor too late. And by that, I don't mean go and see your supervisor tomorrow, you don't have one. But a lot of people start panicking because they've not done enough work and start going to see their supervisor later on, which shows me that they think their supervisor's job is to help them with their writing. But actually, your supervisor's job is to help you with your research direction. So supervisors will tell you, oh, you might want to read this book or that book. We will try and apportion you towards a supervisor that will best be able to help you. If you're doing something on Old Testament, you're probably not going to have me as your supervisor. I even like the Old Testament. So you're going to have someone that kind of knows the subject area that you're working in. But their job is not to find everything out about the subject so they can help you, because it's an independent piece of study. You're supposed to be digging the holes and looking at them to see if there's books there. You're going to have to read the footnotes of the books you're reading and find the other books and the resources, the journals, etc., etc. Good supervisors will point you in the right direction, maybe ask the right questions, or sometimes just point out the flaws in your logic. Right? Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but you need to think about this, this, and this. Right? But I would say the earlier, you need your support of your supervisor earlier rather than later, because it's at the early stage they can help you with the direction of your project's going on. And if you then look at this module content section, you can kind of almost checklist your way through this in your own process of learning. So you can come in and say, right, I'm working independently, I have a supervisor. Number one, I have to choose a topic for research. Number two, I have to identify and collect appropriate literature. And that, for me, is one of the key reasons you want to be doing this now rather than later. You want to do this before the summer rather than after. Because actually, you probably want to spend the majority of your research over the summer is actually deciding, can the area that I'm looking at work? Does the question that I'm asking even make sense? And is it a good question? Are other people asking it? Whereabouts am I going to find the resources to answer this question? So let's say you came to me and said, hey, listen, I want to do something on, Mark chapter 8. And, I just want to ask a question about it as a discipleship text. What sort of things might you do over the summer as you're preparing for a dissertation on Mark chapter 8? What do you think? Read some books on Mark. Great idea, right? Actually start reading some general work on Mark's gospel. Commentaries, probably not the whole commentary at this stage, because you just want to look at Mark chapter 8, but maybe reading the introduction, reading Mark 8, see what the commentaries point out.
I was just going to say read Mark.
Okay, yeah, read Mark, great idea. So do a bit of looking at the text you're dealing with. What else might you do from there? Say again?
Make notes.
Make notes, call, have a pen. See what I would start doing, when I was reading the commentaries on Mark, I would start looking at where are the commentaries getting their data from, right? And this is the thing, a real big important part for you now as you move into your third year, as you develop your research ability, is where did the people you are reading get their ideas from? So it becomes the bit that you've been ignoring for your whole life, footnotes and bibliographies. And you then go, actually, when I was reading this chapter on Mark chapter 8, they quoted these 3 journals. I want to read those 3 journals and find out what they've got to say. And you slowly but surely start developing quite a pile of literature that's defending. So when you then come back after the summer and you start to fill out your dissertation proposal, what actually goes in there is the bibliography of all the things you've been studying and reading. Your bibliography that goes in your proposal, by the way, is not a list of books you hope to read. Right? It should be a list of books that you have read in order to pull this proposal together. Does that make sense? So that's quite an important one. It's not like, because you actually, at proposal stage, you want to have at least an idea that your question will work. Too often I find people are guessing at their proposals and hoping that their supervisor will save them. But I think, especially now that you've got a full summer to work on this, you want to be coming back with a proposal idea that you've done some exploration in and think, actually, this subject works. One of the dead giveaways that's not the case is how often you've heard the third years doing this. These guys didn't, so I'm going to tell them off, but the other ones are not here. How often you hear people changing their dissertation constantly. Well, that suggests to me somebody that's not been doing the research properly because they've not been looking sufficiently ahead of time to see, is there actually a question here, and can I answer that question in 8,000 words? Does that make sense? So then, to identify and collect appropriate literature, and then offering critical analysis and evaluation of the source material. This is where it all starts to develop then. Is there a question that you've got? Is there actually something that you're asking? And are you able to evaluate and critically assess that question you're asking? Or is it just some nice stuff you thought you'd write about? And I mentioned this word already, but I think it's a really important word in academics, the word jeopardy. Basically, you have to ask a question that has a possible answer to it and a possible wrong answer to it. You know? Because if you ask a question that can't be either right or wrong, i.e., how would you even prove that you properly answered this question? You know, do you understand what I'm saying? That becomes very difficult for your marker to assess you. So you need to be answering something. If you notice, every question you've answered so far in your time at Mattersey has a potential to get the question right and a potential to get the question wrong. You know, so my personal testimony of how I met Jesus is not a dissertation question, right? Because how can we prove whether it's right or wrong? You know, well, it's a great testimony you told us there, but if you'd maybe just killed a couple of people before you met Jesus, it would have been a great testimony, as it is too. And so you understand that my testimony might be a great story, but it's not a piece of academic research because it's unverifiable, it's unprovable, and there's not a great deal I can do about it without perjury, really. So do you understand what I mean? But is John's Gospel true? Is a question that you can now get your teeth into, and with a methodology actually set about it and show, I'm going to answer this question in the following ways. Does that make sense? Now, this is a key thing then for you, and this is where I think your supervisors will really help you. Again, everything you've done so far in your work at Mattersey, the methodology has been set in one of the following ways. The first way that your methodology has been set is basically by the particular module you're taking. Right? So when you take New Testament, it's a high likelihood that the work you do is going to be related to the New Testament. Right? And so sometimes, and people have fallen foul of this occasionally, where they started to answer a question and they're thinking about things to do with, I picked a few of you up on this year, starting to think about apologetics and trying to think about evangelism and things like that, which are all great subjects, but they're not the subject you're currently writing your question on. Does that make sense? So in a New Testament question, in a New Testament course rather, you're doing NT work, so there's a kind of assumption right at the start as to the frame of reference that you're working in. And then oftentimes, within the actual, when you get the essay sheet that says choose one of the following four, it will set up a methodology for you. Using historical criticism, answer the following question. Or, does a narrative critical approach help with the following issue? And can you see how the question itself is setting up the parameters as to how you're going to go about answering this? One of the things you've got to choose in your dissertation is not just then, what am I going to ask? Right, so it's a really key important thing. I've spent most of my time so far talking about that. What am I going to ask? The second most important thing is equally important, is how am I going to ask it? Right? And so those two things are important for you to engage with. So what's my subject and how am I going to ask it? So, because I could say, let's all do dissertations on John's Gospel. Right? It doesn't narrow us down that much, because there are a whole range of different ways that we could all approach John's Gospel that would be perfectly valid for a dissertation. Does Do you understand what I mean? So one person says, I'm going to do a historical critical study. Another person says, I'm going to do a literary reading. Another person says, I want to ask theological questions. Someone else says, I want to ask, is John's gospel a good gospel to give out to people that are not yet Christians? You know, all of those would be possible questions to ask that you could then do a proper study on and find some qualitative data to prove or disprove the question. Does that make sense? So think about that. What and how. That really, and your answer will essentially be the why in all of that. But the what and how are really important. So thinking about what's my subject area going to be, that should take some time. But once you've got that sort of rough idea, spending some real time thinking about your method, and then this is key, sticking to that method. So once you've chosen your method, then your essay that you write, your 8,000 words, has to be focused on that particular method. It has to work within that particular method. So halfway through, you're doing a social scientific reading of Matthew chapter 4. You decide, I'm a bit bored with this, let's see if this works for local church. Well, now you've just switched methods. And it might, the new question might be valid, but your data is probably not because of the way you went around gathering it. Does that make sense? Think about it like this, bit of a metaphor, because we're all Christians and we like metaphors. You walk into a supermarket and all of the stuff's there to cook a whole host of meals. If I sent you to Asda, right, there are other supermarkets, they're all good, or corrupt, sorry Chris. If I send you to a supermarket and I say, go and buy something for dinner, that's a very difficult question to answer. Because there's a whole host of things that you now need to ask me, right? That's the what am I going to do, right? I say, let's have spaghetti carbonara. All of a sudden, I've just narrowed the whole supermarket down for you. And now you can start to structure your approach to the supermarket on the basis of what you need to come out with at the end. That's your method, then. That you're coming in and going, goodness, a whole library of books. But now I've got a method, I know what my area is, and I know what the actual approach I'm taking is. You can now start to ignore all hosts of things that, that sometimes as dissertation students we try and answer everything. This is going to be the definitive piece of work on Luke's Gospel. Once I've finished this dissertation, no one will ever write on Luke again. and as much as secretly that's what you feel, it's not going to be true. So you're going to have to narrow it down and take the sort of approaches that you need to take. Is that okay? So that's kind of two big things. It took maybe a while to say that, but that sort of what and how is what you're pushing at. And it's going to take you some time. It's going to be hard work. There are going to be moments where you genuinely are going to say, I don't really know what to do anymore. There are going to be moments where you're going to say, these guys are going to talk about this, I think I'm lost. There are going to be moments where you say, can I have 3 dissertations spaced? There are going to be moments where you say, can I just go home now, please? And all these things are going to happen to you. And part of what you're learning in this is the ability to do a larger project and sustain yourself through it. And let me say this, and I think this is really important. The difference between bad students and good students, I've become increasingly convinced, isn't that different. Right? We all sit in classes, and we all sit in libraries, and we all read books. And I would say this is absolutely true of my life, it's true of everyone else I spoke to. Peter, I'm sure will agree with it. There are moments where you sit there and go, I have no idea what's going on anymore. Right? You've all had that moment where you're reading a book and go, I don't know what he's talking about now. And this is the difference between a bad student and a good student. A good student keeps going, the bad student gives up and goes home. Right? But nobody, get rid of this myth that some people look at it and it just makes sense to them. Right? It's about what you're willing to do at that point where you actually don't know what's going on anymore, when you're a bit lost. And that's where you find out what you're willing to give to research or not, is can I keep digging around here, even though I'm actually at a moment, I'm not quite sure where this is going to go. And that's true of every professor I've spoke to, and it's true of every student I spoke to. Nobody is preserved from that feeling. And in your dissertation, you're going to get that feeling. If you know now what the answer to your dissertation is going to be, it's not a dissertation for you, because it's not going to require 400 hours of study. Does that make sense? Yeah. So don't worry if at the minute you think, I know what I want to study, I even know how I'm going to study it, but I don't know what the answer is going to be. That might be a good piece of work you've got there. Do you hear what I'm saying? I'm going to hand over Chris and Harvey now, and their brief, I'm going to look at you and make sure I give them the right brief here, was to just come in and share a little bit, having just handed in and had their dissertations half marked And but as in, we know what Chris has got, we don't know what Abby's got. So and we could change it on that, just to be cruel. We're gonna ask them just to come and share a little bit about things they wish they knew when they were at your stage just now, and maybe share a little bit about their own experience of writing a dissertation. Is that okay?
Representation of what we should do, and I'm not so good one.
Yeah, but
I know what he got.
when we asked people that way, nobody wanted to do it. So
Yeah.
I did still take Harvey's other jacket, so.
thank you. But I stole your handkerchief, so.
Okay, so basically we're just gonna give a few things from our experience, and we're gonna kind of just do it at the same time because we've had a lot of the same thoughts. So basically, when I was you this time last year, I was big time freaking out. I wasn't a big fan of writing essays anyway. I much prefer exams. And the idea of 8,000 words was really freaking me out. And I completely got to that stage that Dave was talking about where I felt like actually I needed like loads more words than I actually had. So first off, don't panic about the number of words, because actually it's much more doable than you actually think. And the other thing is right now, be confident in the thoughts that you're having about the questions and stuff. So I had like about 5 different potential questions going round and round my head, and it took me ages to actually commit to one of them because I just thought, well, what if I choose the wrong one? What, you know, all that kind of stuff. And you just need to have just a bit of like confidence in yourself that you can do it and that you're going to make the right decision about the one that you go for. And I think go with your gut. Like, you know, Dave said, there's nobody that doesn't have any idea what they want to do, even if it's just this kind of niggling thing that you feel about theology or anything like that. Just kind of think a little bit more on it and just go with your gut, because it'll be the thing that you want to spend a year studying. And make sure that it is something that you want to spend a year studying, otherwise it would just be awful. Yeah. Right, my 2 big things are about early research and structure of study. So one of my kind of regrets really is that I didn't do enough background research early on, because slightly naively I thought I'll wait until I have got my supervisor and I have my first chat with my supervisor before I really launch into research. That was a big mistake, because later on there was loads of things that I wanted to research, but I felt like it was a waste of time because they weren't kind of specific to my question. So I did research them because I needed to, but kind of I felt like I should be researching something really specific now, and this is just very background. So even over this summer, if you know you're going to do New Testament dissertation, then just read some stuff about New Testament. You know, if you definitely know it's going to be a Gospels thing or a Paul thing, then yeah, go with John's been looking at, like, seriously, so much to write on. Just do general reading. Just, you know, like Chris said, it's a silly thing, but read the Bible. It really will help. And yeah, just do lots of just general reading. And then as soon as you've kind of got a specific area, just start reading straight away. Do not leave it until after Christmas. It is just not worth your while. And then my other big thing is that I'm quite a structured person. I like planning, I like all that kind of thing. So straight away, even before I had my question, even before the proposal was in and all that kind of stuff, I planned my year. So I had 40 credits in the first semester and 40 credits in the second semester. And I literally worked out, like, every week what I was going to be doing with my time. That's the only way I was able to do this year. And that's the way I work. And that might be just too structured for some of you, but I really would advise having a think about structure, and don't leave it all until after Christmas. Don't leave thinking about it until after Christmas. Don't leave, because I don't quite know what your deadline's going to be next year, but we faced this year pretty much making sure everything was done before mission, because you couldn't leave it until after. So actually, by the time you get back from Christmas, you're then looking at maybe 6 weeks before you're going on mission, and time just goes. So you need to plan your year before you really get to it. Chris, I feel like you should probably talk.
Okay, that's all right. Cool. Yeah, so it was, I think Dave's mentioned a bit of my journey with the whole dissertation thing, which I'll talk about, but just on the back of what Abby was saying there, it is 40 credits, which I just, at the start of third year, didn't really think that I had to get serious with in the first semester, which was really dangerous for me because the way, I don't know if it'll be structured the same for you guys next year, but we have the before Christmas and after Christmas deadline. So I only had 1,000 words in before Christmas, which meant I did nothing at all on any subjects before Christmas. And then I started doing everything that I had to do after Christmas, which was during the holidays, all the stuff for after Christmas, and then straight away from that thinking about my dissertation and the other 40 credits that I had for the rest of the year, which made after Christmas 80 credits to do, which was a lot of work. Luckily for me, I was saved by I was saved by Jesus. No, luckily, in second year I came up with a question about, I said, oh, is this the reason why X happened in Corinthians? And Dave was like, I don't know, we'll go and find it out. So I had that amount of time from halfway through my second year thinking about what I was going to do. So when it came to the summer, I was thinking about ways to structure my question, ways, the types of places I needed to go, and places I needed to read to try and figure it out. And I couldn't find anywhere that really talks about what I wanted to talk about. So I was fortunate enough just by doing general background research to find some information, which led me to emailing a scholar who told me some stuff that she'd been working on, and it all worked out in the end basically anyway. But if I'd not done those sort of early background research, I wouldn't have even known where to start with it. Then on the back of that, I think your dissertation supervisors are really good to talk to, properly sit down and chat with. It might sound like an obvious thing, but once you know what you're doing, once you hand in your proposal and it gets approved, go and see them as soon as possible, because I had John Moxon, and obviously John left partway through the year.
Because of Chrissy's dissertation.
Yes. I was there every hour. So, he really, really helped me in terms of directing me along some paths that I hadn't even thought about. It was sort of some stuff that was tucked away maybe in a couple of articles, and one or two articles said, oh, maybe this was related to this other thing, and I just sort of glossed over it as I was reading it, but John drew my attention to it and said, oh, this looks like this could be related to this, and have you thought about how this other thing can then relate to the bigger picture of what's going on generally in the context of 1 Corinthians, and that kind of thing, which I would have completely missed and would have been really detrimental to what I was writing, because actually that kind of thing ended up making a big part of my argument and how I was going to say and how I was going to structure what I was going to structure. So, yeah. Do you want to say something else?
Sorry. When you get to that point of desperation and despair and the whole world's dying around you, don't do it alone. Because there are people around you also feeling the same thing. And it's not good to kind of go and do this big, woe is me thing, because that tends to just end up making you feel much worse. But seriously, don't do it alone. At this stage, with the dissertations, you're all so different with the questions and stuff. So it's not like if you're going to talk to each other, then you're going to be trading secrets and plagiarising each other and all that kind of stuff. So talk to each other about things that you're doing. Don't kind of feel like you're an island and doing it all by yourself. Also, when you're working, plan it really carefully. So I kind of went off the radar a little bit in this bit between Christmas and commission, which I partly don't regret because I know that I just needed to work, and otherwise I would have regretted not giving my all to my studies. But I partly regret because I'm in my final year and maybe I haven't spent time with people in the way that I should have done. And so I just think, just be really careful about finding the balance of spending social time with each other and then studying and stuff. And that's just down to discipline and just cracking down and find a place where you can study. So if that's the library, if it's your room, if it's coming in the classroom in the evening or whatever, just find that place. I had something else. What was it? Hold it last. Yeah, you carry on.
Can I interject just there? Another thing to do when you're doing a year one project, as evidenced by Abby just now, and I'm only teasing you just like this now, have some sort of device, or paper is a device, or a phone, or an iPad, or a computer, and a pen. And because what you'll find when you're involved in a large-scale research project, ideas will strike you at the strangest of times.
Yes.
That then you lose very quickly. Now, this is just good advice for life in general, but actually the amount of times I've got a phone full of notes of ideas that when I get back to my writing day, I'm going to write that down in there. But if you think, I must remember that when I'm writing on Thursday night, it's gone by Thursday night. So actually taking a point of, in some sense, live with this project. It's kind of always on your mind a little bit. Try not to let a day go by that you're not have given at least 5 minutes of thought to it, even in the early stages. Otherwise, you get that moment you think, you get a really annoying thing where you'll sit there and think, I had a really important thought about this at the beginning of this week and now I can't remember it.
Not what I was going to say, but off the back of that, keep saving your work. Like, seriously, don't ever have a situation where you think you've lost your work. Save different copies of it in different places, put it on the internet, email it to yourself, literally just don't ever have that situation. Thankfully I didn't, but I thought I had at one point and I was crying and it was a mess.
Research.
So
my method for what Dave was saying was I have a massive spider diagram that I just had on my iPad like all the time. So that was really helpful in terms of structuring thoughts and structuring because when I got all my research together, a lot of what I did was I didn't read any of it when I initially got it. A lot of the stuff I got from the online library, and I just read the abstracts and decide if I thought this might be relevant, and categorise it all, put it all into folders, and say this is going to be relevant if I'm talking about this particular subject area around my dissertation. So if I'm for example talking about the body metaphor in 1 Corinthians, then these 7 articles are going to be really relevant and I'll keep them here. But then as it turned out, I didn't have time to talk about that and it was not as relevant to my dissertation, so I ended up just not using them. Things like that was really helpful because they just saved me a lot of time. And on that, the thing is that there's a lot of work that you will do that won't make it in to your dissertation, as some of you might find with 2,000 word essays. I always found it all the time with 2,000 word essays. But with the dissertation, I wrote a ridiculous amount of work, finished work. I got about, I think, 13,000 words or more. And you just have to slash it and slash it and slash it and slash it, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So what you need to do is you need to be better than I am at redacting your thoughts on the way to the paper or to the keyboard. Like what out of your research is going to be vital to what you're doing. And so I only realised this halfway through, but if it's not directly answering my question, if it's not of direct relevance, then it shouldn't be in my dissertation. And it took me a conversation with someone to actually realise that. But that's really helpful in terms of cutting down what you need to say. So for me, going into like specific detail about what's going on in like a town that's completely irrelevant but's kind of got maybe a little bit of relevance to the periphery of the question. It's like that it's not important for my dissertation at all. So you sort of think it is because it's something that you've never come across before, and you're spending all this time researching. What you're normally doing in a 2,000 word essay, you're just surveying, you just sort of getting an overview of a bigger topic that people have written books and books on. When you get an 8,000 word question, you sort of like pushing the surface a little bit more. You sort of pushing your way into scholarship and what it actually is to research something properly and to read something properly. So when you're doing that, you're discovering things that you've never even contemplated before, or never even thought about before. So you think, oh, that's amazing, it needs to go in my dissertation. But you can't just keep doing that because it's not relevant. So you've got to make sure that what you're writing is going to be relevant and is going to make a difference and support your overall argument all the time. So,
Let me come in. I marked, or I was supervising a paper, and the first 2,000 words, I told the student that all has to go. Because it was brilliant, but it wasn't relevant. And he looked at me like, yeah, but look at all these footnotes, and it's nice, and I like that bit about the mind, and I like that, but it just had to go, because it wasn't evaluative. And so it's painful, isn't it, to get rid of stuff that you've written. Even better not to write it then, but yeah.
And I think that writing rather than not writing is better.
Yes.
Right? As painful as it sounds, cutting a 13,000 word dissertation down to 8,000 words is actually easier than taking a 5,000 word dissertation and making it 8,000 words. You know, I think Chris's advice is really good as well. Peter mentioned to me about one essay, one dissertation that he'd marked. He said every paragraph adds something to the dissertation.
Yes.
And try to think about, you've got your starting point of your dissertation, and then you're going to have at some point a conclusion where you say, and this is actually true of every essay you write, where you say, and this therefore is the point. And go through your essay, and if every single paragraph hasn't taken the idea and moved it further towards the conclusion, the real serious question is, should that even be in there? Even if every word in the paragraph is factually true and very interesting, if it simply takes you off on a nice detour to tell you some nice stuff about something that doesn't move the argument on, then you do need to be brutal with that and just say that doesn't deserve to be in here because it isn't helping me answer this question, you know. And this is something, and I'll say this to you, and this is, listen to Chris on that one, because I've criticised all of you often enough in feedback from essays about this very thing. It's the amount of times we start essays with all sorts of nice flowery data that doesn't move the question on. So 300 words into the essay, we're no further on than we were when we started. What do you think's going on in John 3:16? Well, John was probably written by the son of Zebedee. Very nice. It doesn't help answer the question. And you've got to be that brutal with it. That otherwise your marker's reading it, just going, well, that's nice, but what's the answer? Do you hear what's going on there? It's very important.
I was just going to say one more thing about the research methods and stuff. If you haven't already worked out how you research, then work it out really quickly. Do it over summer when you're doing some reading. Work out how you remember things and like trace things back. So I know that I really struggle to remember who said what. So I can remember pretty much where it is on the page, because I'm a visual learner. So I could pretty much get the book for you and find the page and point exactly where it is on the page, but I couldn't for life of me tell you who said it. So basically I ended up with various slider diagrams and charts and things like that. So I had, my whole dissertation was in a slider diagram with threads going everywhere, because John's Gospel, oh my word, everything links to everything. It's just a mess. And then I had another chart where if I came across a scholar who said something, I kind of made a heading and kind of put a tick or a cross next to him, whatever. And then if I found somebody else who made the same sort of comments, I put his name underneath. And then kind of, so you could then have this track through of such and such and such says this, but so-and-so says the opposite or something like that. So just work out what works for you.
Great stuff. Give them a round of applause. Now, what we'll do in a bit is we'll have some Q&A, and so if the guys are going to hang around, or if you can hang around, maybe you'd be good for the Q&A as good as anyone. What we'll have a little bit of a break, but just before that, shall we bring on the library?
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the library. One of the questions that everyone should be asking is, where's the library? How many books? A question that you should be asking is, I wonder if I can take out any books from the library over the summer. Isn't that exactly what you were thinking? Yeah. Here is the library made flesh. So tell us, please.
And of course you do mean the research centre.
Of course, yes, I meant the research centre.
Yeah. The library is no more. Yeah. Long live the library. And yes, if you want a really easy dissertation topic, do the Old Testament. Okay?
Yes, good idea.
None of this human honour rubbish. Okay. You all probably did get an email, if by this time in the year you are still reading your emails from the college. I did send one out last week or the week before, just basically outlining what's going to happen over the summer. Also put it on Facebook as well, because most of you are on Facebook even now. One of the important things which you're probably going to have to rush if you want to make it is the fact that if you've got any books to return, they should probably have been returned today. And just check the dates, otherwise you will incur fines, and you need to pay your fines before you leave, or else you don't get into third year if you don't pay them. So basically, if you're wanting to do some research over the summer, we will allow you to take books out, but you need to come and speak to us. We'll need to do it on an individual case basis, basically because it will depend very much on what your subject is. Masters students come in on the 1st of September, 3rd of September I think it is. They come in to do their 2 weeks before you come, and we must have books for them. So it may be that we will not be able to give you books out anyway. We don't know as yet what the subjects are for Masters, not yet, for what they're going to be covering, but come and speak to us anyway. If you're looking to borrow books, you can over the summer up until the 1st of September. How you get them back to us is up to you, but you can have them up to the 1st of September. As I say, because Masters need them.
Up to you, but let's just clarify. Carrier pigeon, throwing them in the air hopefully. These are not valid ways to get to them back.
Throw them into a space-time portal.
Giving them to another student. And other unreliable methods.
That's it, yeah. The other important thing as well is library books do not leave this country. Okay. So if you're going abroad for the summer, you cannot take library books out, because if you lose them, then you're responsible for buying the library some new books. Okay, that are the stipulations that we're going to have to lay down. Yes, you can take it to the 1st of September, and please get them back before then, and do not take them out. And please use the resources that we have in the research centre. Also use the resources that you've got online. Use Chester, use Sage Publications, which are most of the journals that we have in the library. But apart from that, that's all that we have to say from the research centre.
What if,
Any questions? Yes, sir.
what if you take a book out, right, and then over the summer the country you're in votes for independence, and it becomes a different country?
Then that's abroad.
Oh, okay. Scottish people, just be careful. Take your book. No, you're alright. You're alright.
What a good question. That's the kind of forward thinking you need. Come on, why don't you give David a round of applause? Any questions for the research centre?
It's all crystal clear.
So,
Let's see. Come and take, yes.
how many books can we allow?
4 books.
Four
4 books.
How many books are you going to read in the summer?
Yeah, that's the thing.
About 10.
You need to buy 6.
No, just 4 because there are obviously a lot of people here, and if you're all going to do honour and shame, we only have a certain number of books on that, so 4 books on that.
I basically forbid anyone from doing anything on Paul in the New Testament.
Right, okay.
So Martin will have to do
So yeah, we have to limit it to 4. That's all.
And it is, like you said, it's on a case-by-case basis, because we know what the masters is. So just be merciful to the library.
Come and talk to us.
Yes,
that's the best thing.
Can I ask a question? I don't know the answer to this, but it might be helpful for people. It's up to them. Is the library open during the summer
No.
to use as a reading centre?
No, because the library won't exist during the summer, because it will be
So it morphed into a research
it
centre.
will be somewhere between there and there.
No, but just that might be helpful, because someone might think, well, I'll just go in for a few days.
No,
during the
because
summer.
come the end of July, we will be boxing all the books. Once the mammals have been in the end of June,
Insects.
we will then be boxing all the books, so you will not get access to the books. So that's why you need to come and see us before you leave.
That's a really important clarification.
Cool.
Great stuff. Everyone happy to have a 5-minute break?
What is this craziness?
Okay, guys, round of applause, please, for David Harvey.
All right, so you're kind of getting a bit of an idea of things that are going on in it all. Now, a couple of comments. You have been handed out already by Peter. You've got the Mattersey Hall headed Writing a Long Essay or Dissertation. Now, we could have made this session just simply reading through this bit of paper here, but by this stage you should be able to read. So we're basically going to suggest that you read it yourself, and as controversial as that is.
It's online as well.
And that then brings me to the point that on the website, if you go to the undergraduate section of the website, actually all the files that you need are there for you to download. So you can download the guide to writing a dissertation, you can download the tips for writing a dissertation proposal, you can download the dissertation proposal form, which you also have a copy of, which is here. Now this is just a sample dissertation proposal form, because it might change by next year. So one of the things you'll do when you come back at the start of next term is download the latest one at that point then. Doesn't mean you can't use this, it won't be that dissimilar, it just might look ever so slightly different. There might be a few extra categories or there on, so on and so forth. Let me just say this really categorically, because sometimes, there are different opinions get out there. And the forms that you need will be on the website for you to download, right? So it's a challenge for us to make sure they are, doesn't it? But there was a little issue, and Chris and I talked about it at one stage this year, that some students had a dissertation template, and other students didn't. And students that didn't got a little bit upset as to why have they not been given a dissertation template. This just simply happened because one of the lecturers gave out a template to help some of their students, but it became viewed as, well, this is the template you're supposed to use. So how we're going to correct that for you guys this year is we are going to write a dissertation template for you. So when you come back next year, that will also be on the website. And it will basically guide you through the things that you need to have in your dissertation. So it will say something like, this is where your table of contents would go, this is where your bibliography would go, you know, this bit would be your abstract, and one will be at the beginning, one will be at the end. And profound. And but then other questions about what goes in the word count and all that sort of stuff, just to try and help you with that. It won't do all your formatting for you because that is still one of the requirements that you need to do yourself. But we decided we're going to do that just to get away from this problem of, because actually then as it turned out, the dissertation template that was passed around really was a master's level dissertation template. So students were filling in sections they didn't actually need to fill in for an undergraduate thing. Think about it this way, it is a dissertation, it is its own module code, but actually it falls under all of the standard style guide issues, right? So just you basically treat it like a normal essay that's 8,000 words long when it comes to actually writing the jolly thing, if that makes sense. It's your research that really is the big thing that changes. Does that make sense? So even like most students, I think, put contents pages in, didn't they? You actually need to, but actually it is helpful once you get beyond a few thousand words. It really helps as a marker to be able to have a look at it and kind of see where the person is going and what they've got going on. So in terms of, at the minute, there's no style, there's no template on the website, but there will be by the time you come back for next semester. Is that okay? Right, so if you grab a copy of the dissertation proposal that you have, which is it's stapled at the back of the dissertation module specifications, and you just sort of see the kind of stuff that's on there. And again, this will basically be self-explanatory. Once the actual one goes up at the start of next year, it will have a return date on it. It will have who you're supposed to send it back to on it. So again, this is just a sample. You'll then put your name, your email address, and you'll circle whether you're doing a British Summertime or Christian Leadership. And so that'll be the old jokes of the reference.
I've never heard that.
Have you not? Okay.
That must be new.
And so that stuff should be self-explanatory. Now, then you write your proposed title. Now, your proposed title can change, right? And it will change more than likely over the course of the year, because as you do more and more study, you realise most people, what happens is they come up with what they think is a great question, and then they sit down with their supervisor who says it's too big. You're not going to be able to answer that in 8,000 words. So they narrow it down, and then they do some study, and then they come back to the supervisor, and they say, I think it's still too big. And basically, you constantly are narrowing, because the more study you do, the more there is to read about. But do attempt to set some sort of title at this stage. Right? Far too many people take the whole proposal form kind of a bit too glibly, and you just get this random scribble about, oh, I'm going to do something about something. And that, if you want to take it that glibly and just say, I'm going to do something about something, what that means is your first supervision meeting won't be great. Right? If you do a really good proposal where you say, this is the title that I want this, and it's by title, think question, right? So this is the question that I'm setting out to ask. And then you set out a good kind of contents outline of bibliography. What happens is that'll get submitted, more than likely it'll go straight to Peter. Peter will read it, and he'll go, oh, this person wants to do something on Galatians, and they're thinking about issues of honour and shame in Galatians. Well, actually, that's what Dave's doing his PhD work on. I bet he'd love to supervise that dissertation. He'd be wrong, I don't. But, so he'll hand it to me. So I'll then look at your dissertation. If it says, I'm going to do some stuff on Galatians to do with honour and shame, well, I'm going to have to wait till you turn up for our first meeting to listen to hear what you actually are wanting to look at, and then off the top of my head, think of some advice that I can give you and go from there. But if I've got a good proposal off you, by the time you come to your first meeting, I've already written down a few books for you to look at, maybe printed out a journal because I'm a nice guy, and I've said, here's some stuff to go straight away with. So you're off and running before your first supervisions happen because you wrote a good proposal form. So, you might sit down with someone like Robin, who's an expert in Isaiah, and you're interested in Isaiah, but it's always helpful. The more advice you can give him as to what you're really interested in, the more prepared he can be to give you the sort of answers that you need. Does that make sense? So in one sense, you'll get past, you could just put something together and send it in, but the person that will be helped the most is actually you. The clearer your proposal is, the higher chance there is that Peter's going to assign you to a tutor who can actually help you. I'm just going to do some stuff about the Bible. Well, if you get a proposal that says I'm going to do some stuff about the Bible, let me tell you how people will process these, right? He'll go, I've got one person who wants to do something on honour and shame in Galatians. I've got another person who wants to do something on, Isaiah and exile. I've got somebody else who wants to do something on Pentecostal studies in the contemporary church. And he'll go Dave, Robin, myself, and then I want to do something about the Bible. This is what will happen. That'll keep getting put to the bottom of the pile, and then eventually it'll be who's free. And you'll get assigned to whoever's not got enough dissertation students already. Because
stuff.
yeah, basically. What's wrong with the kitchen? But the more detail you give, the more chance there is that you'll read a dissertation and go, I know exactly who needs to supervise this. So you're really helping yourself. So get that title as best as you can, right? And then two other things, project requirements. If you're doing biblical studies and theology, the high likelihood is that everybody you would want to talk to have already died. Notwithstanding some sort of theological comment you want to make about the afterlife or Jesus' eternal existence. But by and large, most of the interaction you're going to do at research level is with books, right? And reading of the text. But if you're doing a Christian leadership course, there's quite a possibility that you might want to do an interview with somebody. And you might want to speak to somebody. Now that raises a whole new different series of issues that need to be considered. You can't just scribble down some questions and rock up to your pastor and ask him them. What you need to do is construct the interview questions that you're going to ask in conversation with your supervisor. Alright? And your supervisor will approve whether you're allowed to ask those questions or not. And there'll also be all sorts of strictures you need to fall into as to what you do with the answers. Right? Because data is a really important thing in this day and age, so we've got to make sure we protect it. If, at the other level, if you want to ask questions that are considered inappropriate, or if you want to ask questions to vulnerable people, right, basically you won't be allowed to. Right? So if you want to do a series of interviews with children to assess how good their youth worker is, you won't be allowed to do it, because you can't interview vulnerable people at undergraduate level. It's all to do with what they call ethics panels. Once you move higher up the sort of scale of your studies, you can, if you want to interview people that might require some ethics approval, then the university get involved and look at your questions and decide how you're going to handle the data, etc., etc. But the university have basically decided that at undergraduate level, they basically won't approve anything that has ethical questionability about it. So, but you would be allowed to interview a couple of pastors, for example, as long as you could show that the interviews would be helpful and we'll move you on. So that's a little bit of a difference between a biblical studies and theology and a Christian leadership question. Does that make sense? So that's important. My best advice to you would be honest with you, with an undergrad dissertation, is if you can do it without doing any interviews, it will help you. Because interviews create all sorts of... Remember earlier on I said if I just did a dissertation, it was my testimony. It's very hard to choose what do you do with this data. Well, the sort of time you've actually got, although it sounds like a lot of time, to do enough interviews to be able to come up with a piece of data that you can say is, if you came to interview me and said, what do people think about coffee in your church? And I said, we all love coffee in my church. And you would then write, Pentecostal pastors love coffee. Well, anyone's going to read your dissertation and go, you interviewed one person, right? And it's Dave, he's crazy. And, this is not, clearly it's not enough. So you understand, so you then start thinking, well, how many people do you need to interview to be able to say, and then you start realizing it's a lot of people. So my best advice would be, try and think about a project at undergrad level that you can do. You've got all this other issues about how do you go and interview those people, where do you get the money from, where do you get the time from, etc., etc. So, but if you think, no, I do really need to interview someone for this project, then mention that on here, and then you can talk to your supervisor about that when you get assigned. Is that okay? Second thing is additional courses. It may well be that you look at the module spec for next year and realize, actually, because as Chris said, it takes up 40 credits of your time to do your dissertation, so that only leaves you with 80 credits of modules to take. Please let me just say this as a word of advice. Think about your spread of modules as well. Right? So don't think, I'll tell you what I'll do, I'll take 10 credits in semester 1, 70 credits in semester 2, and do my dissertation, right? Because that's going to be stressful. And, well, pre-Christmas it'll be pretty chilled. But, but after Christmas, it'll be very stressful. So think even in terms of, how am I going to balance my courses out? Some people might even want to load it up a bit heavy at the front so that there's time at the end, or, but please, that's on your head at some level. So, no one's going to come in and hold your hands and say, oh, we think you've taken too many courses. So think about that. But also what we notice is you essentially lose 40 credits of teaching. This year, you've had 120 credits of teaching. Next year, you're getting 80 credits of teaching. So what we've done is we've basically allowed every dissertation student to audit 20 credits of their own choice. The theory being that they're related to the subject that you want to do your dissertation in. So that's why, if you remember, if you did Pauline Studies with me, we had some third years that kind of appeared and stopped coming after a while. But once we've done 1 Corinthians, they all of a sudden disappeared. But the idea is that you can look across the second and third year, and maybe there was a course that you realise you didn't take in second year, but now that you're doing a church history dissertation, you realise I really should have taken church history. I just didn't realise I was going to be so interested in that at the time. Well, you can audit church history. Standard rules of auditing, Chris, is that you start the course, you finish the course. But the basic rule is that you look at, is there 20 credits? Not mandatory. You might think, actually, I prefer not to take that time. But if you're looking at it and you think, actually, this would help my dissertation and I've used up all my credits and still I can't take that, there's 20 credits out there that you can basically go to a class that you're not currently taking. That would mean, by the way, just to clarify if you don't realise that, auditing means you go, you take part in the class, but you don't do any of the work. It's the dream, right? And so you wouldn't have any essays to do. So don't think, I have to do an essay and I don't get credited. You would simply just go to that class and do no work for it. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So now at that point you would think, actually, I didn't do New Testament background, and that would have been a good idea. So you would just write that in there, and it just helps us to know. I'm not going to let you down with that one. It just helps us to know that actually there's people thinking about doing this sort of thing. Is that okay? And then on page 2 of this, then, and this is the key bit. In fact, 2 things are helpful. Page 2 of this form, and while we're on it, turn to page 5 of the writing a long essay and dissertation form. And what you've got here is just a little bit of advice that you can work together on in terms of essentially working out your proposal. I think that a good proposal has a couple of features to it. It has a sort of summary. I would say no more than 500 words, right? But more than one sentence, as some people have done. No more than 500 words, simply saying, this is what I'm going to try and do in this thesis, right? This is what I hope to find out. This is why I'm motivated to ask these questions. And this is how I'm going to go about it, right? So you want to try and summarize that in 500 words. And then I think if you can, some sort of contents outline as to how you think that might actually happen. Can be rough, can change, can develop. The sort of stuff that Abby was saying, get that done over the summer. If I was going to ask this question, how would I go about it? What would be my structure? And on page 4 and 5 of this handout, the other handout that you've got, I've tried to give you a sort of rough idea as to how to go about trying to think about doing that. And so there's a lot of questions about how you structure an outline and how you look at your proposed chapters and think. Sometimes you think, how do I write a structure to an essay or how that's this big? Well, actually the question is, what do I need to prove in each of the sections? So work almost backwards. I'm hoping to prove X. In order to do that, I need to do the following. But what did I need to do that? Well, I needed to do the thing before that. And you almost find yourself able to think, here are the things that I'm going to need to prove in order to make the sort of statements that I think I'm going to have to make in this process. In order to prove point 1, there's probably 4 sub-points that I need to prove to make that major point. And actually, even as you're thinking about that in your head, if you had 4 points, each of which had 4 sub-points to prove, if you then put them in some sort of order, you've got a contents page. So even if you can, trying to do something like that on this page, again, so your supervisor can see your sort of thought process as to how you're going to go about this particular project. Does that make any sense? And the final thing on this is just a big space just to let you know you need to write something. Right? It can be longer than this. This is also there where you put your brief bibliography. So here's the research I've been working on so far. And these are the books that kind of help prove to me, because that will help me. So I would look at a proposal with a good bibliography, And I would immediately start to spot, assuming I've got a subject in my area, I would start to spot the gaps. So in our first tutorial, if you give me a really good dissertation proposal, in our first tutorial, if I was your supervisor, we'd look at the title and we'd be thinking about, right, okay, this is you're going to need to think about this and this, is that what you were thinking? We might be tweaking it and realise actually the title's a bit wide, you need to narrow it down. And I'd then look at your summary and say, yeah, I think we can achieve this, or that's too big, let's get rid of that sentence there, let's just try and achieve this, because I think you're going to find once you start digging there's a lot. Great contents page, although I think you're going to have to prove section 3 before you prove section 2, so let's move them around. That's the sort of things we do. And then I'd get to your bibliography and go, hey, I also noticed you've not mentioned, such and such's book, which came out a couple of years ago. Did you see it? You say, oh, I've not read it yet, or no, I've not heard of that. Right, you're going to want to read that then, because I think that's going to be really related to the topic that you're dealing with. Whereas if you just give me, a blank with no bibliography, it might be that you've read nothing. That's not great, but it might be that I start saying, well, have you read this? And I have read this. Well, have you read that? I have read that. Whereas actually, again, it's helping your supervisor give you pointed direction in the sense of where you're going. So don't stress about your dissertation proposal. If you do your reading over the summer, it should sort of build itself. What's my question? Short summary of how I'm going to answer it. Short kind of outline as to how I think the essay will look roughly when it's finished. Nobody's going to fail you or pass you on how good that is, but that's just going to help you. And a bibliography. When I say a bibliography, I'm not talking about 40 books that you've stayed up till 3 o'clock every night over the summer reading. But probably in the region of between 6 and 10 books that you've had, or references, because it could be a journal article that's changed your life, But to say, actually, I've done some work on this. It doesn't need to be books. You know by now that every book you've not necessarily read from cover to cover, but it might just be a chapter. And even mark that, say, Bruce Longenecker's Triumph of Abraham's God, chapter 4. So again, it's helping the supervisor see, I've done my work, and it's good. It's a good chapter, and something about the moral eschatological. That sense of what you're showing. These are the areas that I'm working in, and these are the areas that I think are relevant. All about helping you. Right? You do not need to see your supervisor ever. Right? You don't need to talk to them. You need to visit them. They don't need to read your work. That's not a great strategy, okay? But no one's going to, you could write a great essay and pass it, and nobody's going to go, wait a minute, you can't pass this, you never saw your supervisor. I think it's only a crazy person that would try and do that, But at the same time, let me say this, it is your research project. It's not your supervisor's research project. So they're not going to chase you, right? They're not going to come chasing you down going, you've not come to see me yet. Right? And I think that's an important thing to grasp now, because it's about how you manage your own research. Because as you progress up the field in your academics, you get less and less input from other people. So it's about learning to know to go to your supervisor and ask the sort of questions. I think it's a really good advice to say, go to your supervisor with questions that you want answered. Don't expect them to ask you all the right questions. If you send your supervisor some work to read, don't just say, here's some work, what do you think? Send them some work to read and say, could you answer, what do you think about this? I think this paragraph's quite weak. Do you think this paragraph's quite weak? Rather than waiting for your supervisor to spot the weaknesses. You know the bits that you need some help with. So direct your supervisor and say, this is the kind of help I want from you. What have I not mentioned here in this particular paragraph? I feel like I'm not winning my argument. But you direct that. And too often I hear students say, oh, my supervisor wasn't around for me enough. Well, listen, if you're having a real issue with your supervisor, that's a whole different issue. As in, I keep knocking on his door and he keeps telling me to go away. Right? Well, that might be because you're knocking on his door too much, But equally, if someone's refusing to meet you, then there's an issue that Peter and I will try and help sort out. That's not going to happen for you, though. The two kind of problems I get is, over my 2 years of doing this for everybody, and prior to that, when we were doing it at a smaller level, is students thinking it's the supervisor's responsibility to chase them, and then complaining afterwards they didn't have the supervision that they needed. That'd be one big complaint I think I bumped into. And the other one is essentially students wanting too much time with their dissertation supervisor. I think you want to think in terms of 3 or 4 meetings with them over the course of the year. Right? And I think that's relatively healthy. One early on in the semester, once you know who your supervisor is, one of you guys said it, great advice, as soon as you find out who your supervisor is, get